Thanks, everyone. All right, we ready to rock? Yes. All right, let's do this. So I wanted to talk to you about automation and how, as a developer, you could use automation as a tool to make things better, more efficient, faster, and even solve problems that can scale. So that's really kind of what we're going to go into in this talk. And I really wanted to relate it to how you can use automation with WordPress. I think probably the biggest thing to think about is what really is automation. It can be really fuzzy. What does that mean in the context of WordPress? I think it can mean a lot of things, actually. And it can apply to different parts of the process. I think it could apply to how we use WordPress, also how we do things and take WordPress across many sites. So that's kind of the scalability part of it, and then also integrate with other systems. So today I'm going to talk you through a solution that I've built for a customer, and I wanted to use this mind map format because I think it's really just the way that I was thinking about it at the time, and I think it's really helpful to focus on automation and some different parts of what this project went through. And I'll go into some details about the project itself and the customer and the situation, but I probably should introduce myself a little bit more. So my name is Edmund Turbin. I am a solutions architect at Pantheon. I've been at Pantheon for about 3 years now, but only in the past 6 months I've moved to a solutions architect role. So as an SA, what I do is work with customers after they've signed on. So they come to Pantheon and I help them with migrations and also when things go wrong. So if there's a customer and they're having a problem that's platform or plugin related, then I'll be pulled in to help them out. And oftentimes that can be WordPress, it can be platform, and it can be a combination of both. It could be optimization and performance, which is very much often the case with WordPress and WooCommerce. And once the site has to scale for many visitors, it can be very tricky, and that's where I will come into things. So I've been doing sales engineering for about 10 years. So I've been in pre-sales, which put me in a slightly different part of the process. So I have been more aligned to the sales team and signing deals, but now I'm actually getting the deals to getting the customers to be happy, and it's more of a success role than an actual revenue generating role. So I have experience with large portfolios, and I think that this is the story that I want to tell today is really about a large portfolio, and a lot of the experience that I've had as a developer is with universities. So it's a university, and they are quite large. So a little bit more about me. Some of the things that I'm really interested in is CI/CD processes. So getting a piece of code deployed to a site or to many sites. And of course, WordPress development. I've recently done quite a bit more plugin development than I have in previous years, which has been really liberating and really cool. And I feel like I've learned a lot, and it also leads me to other questions, and very interested to hear how maybe you all would approach a problem like what I'll talk about. And really the core of the automation here is going to be scripting. So I do a lot of shell scripting, and that is something that is, it can be really kind of boring and procedural, but it's a really cool thing. Once you can get something to work in a loop and do a bunch of things, I think it's really interesting. Side note, Spice Cadet comes from my music production. So it's my GitHub is GitHub Spice Cadet, but I also produce electronic music under the name Spice Cadet. So I probably haven't mentioned that before, but it's out there. So, okay. Cool. So what is all this about automation? So like I said, this is really the solution that I built is for a customer. They are a university. they have a large portfolio of WordPress sites, and actually they probably have a lot of sites that we don't know about. So for WordPress, we know they have 100 sites, and about 20 of them are multi-sites. One of the interesting things about this customer is they have some really strict security requirements. So their governance is, it's a really interesting model, because the way that the university has their IT structured, there is this IT and security department which the web team will need to go to. The web team is actually relatively small. There's about 2 or 3 people, but for 100 sites, they can't manage them all themselves. So agencies have actually built the sites. So there are 5 to 10 agencies that have built the sites, but they don't actually maintain or use the sites. It's the departments and the staff and the students. So there's a very decentralized structure to all of this, which makes it a challenge. So, but one of the things is that they didn't want any of the sites to be accessible from outside of the university's network. So that's okay, and that works for them. And this is kind of one of their requirements before they moved to Pantheon. And that made a lot of sense, because it was on-premise infrastructure. So they had their servers in-house, and they were able to say, oh, we'll just block everybody that's outside, because it was on their internal network, right? So in a cloud-based solution, that's a bit of a challenge. So the main reason why they wanted to leave this university on-premise infrastructure is just to make it a little bit easier. There was also a problem that they had actually making changes. So if they wanted to update WordPress, it would have to go through a ticketing system and a process, and it was one of these things where it was actually, they'd have to wait for a week to get a simple change. Let's say, for example, they needed to update PHP. That could be problematic, and they had multiple servers, so it wouldn't just be one instance that they had to update. So it was quite a chore for them to even do basic management, and it just made sense to get these sites into an environment where they could actually go and have a little bit more control, and actually think about starting to automate things and make their lives a little bit easier. All right, let's talk about these security requirements. So the university has a web application firewall that prevents anyone from accessing anything that's outside of their network. This was one of the tricky parts to working with them, is that really that you've taken their sites from on-premises within their network to outside of their network, but it still needed to be protected by their web application firewall. It's cloud-based, so that was actually something that can be done. So all of the traffic goes through their WAF, and then it goes to the sites that we have for them on Pantheon. But it's not as simple as just passing the traffic through the WAF. We have to actually say, is the traffic from the university? And if it's not allowed. So that's really one of the big challenges here. So if I was a user at the university, I would be able to log into WordPress and go through the web application firewall, and I would be able to log into the WordPress dashboard. But if I was outside of the university, I wouldn't be able to do that. So even if and it's not so much an access based on the person's role or who they are, their identity, it's more about their location. So they have to be physically on the campus of the university, or they have to be logged in through a VPN. So that makes it really tricky. However, it adds a little bit more of a process for when sites are created and environments are created. We have to make sure that when a site is spun up, so a new site, you would have to enable those IP restrictions. Because Pantheon's a cloud platform, there is really no limitation there. So if you have access to a site or its dashboard, you'd be able to log in. So I think the next part is one of the biggest problems that I had to overcome in their very strict security requirements, and that was plugin restrictions. They didn't want their users to have access to all plugins. Now, the users of the site, it's not necessarily developers that are using the site. It's probably more a combination of editors and admins. So these are people that they need to have the ability to add plugins, but they don't actually have access to the code. So you could solve this problem by using something like Composer. So you could do dependency management and say, all right, here's a list of plugins, and that gets installed. But in this case, the users actually need to install plugins. And the university is quite strict about the way that they wanted to implement this. So we could have done a list that says, no, you can't install these plugins, but they actually wanted to do the opposite. So they didn't want to do a deny list, they wanted to do an allow list, which is actually a little bit more challenging because then you have to understand, well, what is it that people will actually install? Their support process, because of all these restrictions, was a lot more complicated. So even on the Pantheon side, what that means is I can't actually access their site unless I can somehow get around their IP restrictions. And then of course I sort of led into this that if you were creating a new site, the site wouldn't be protected with these restrictions. So that has to be enabled. And it's a very specific thing that we don't do for other customers. So this is something that has to be unique. There's a very specialized standard operating procedure, a playbook that we have for when this customer comes in, how do we support them in the right way and make sure that they comply with their own security. Right, so here's the mind map. We're gonna start to focus on how automation will tie into the rest of the solution. And so again, this is something that is still in progress. I've been working on this for about 6 months, and it has been in bits and pieces along the way, but I think now it's come together to a point where it's a cohesive thing, and it is something that I hope by going through this, it will give you some ideas about how you can take your work and do some automation and make these little things a little bit easier. Okay, so starting with the allow list, I did this as a plugin. So there's a plugin that is built and installed in a WordPress site that will say, here's the list of plugins that you can install. And if a user goes to the dashboard and they try to install a plugin that's not on the list, what would happen is it will pop a message up in the dashboard and say, you're not authorized to do this, or the plugin's not allowed, or whatever the custom error message is that the university wants users to see. So the way that works is, so behind the scenes in WordPress, it's essentially looking at the plugins that are installed and then comparing it to an allow list. The allow list initially was a text file. So I had just essentially a text file with the names of all the plugins, and that it gets you to a point where, yes, I can control what people are installing and what they're able to do, but there's a couple of problems with this. Anybody think about what a problem would be? Yes?
The plugin changes name.
Yeah, so that's a really good one, and that's one of the things that you could easily do. You can get around this plugin in many different ways. So, but I think the really big one is, if I install this as a plugin, what prevents anyone from keeping it on? They could just deactivate it, right? So that was a problem in and of itself. So I took the approach of a must-use plugin. And now that's a little bit more secure. So now what we're able to do is control access to the WordPress site, and the user, they can't really change it. Now, of course, there's going to be ways where they can work around that. But I think it's a little bit more solid in that it is installed in a place where the user can't really deactivate it. They are restricted in a useful way. So that gets us to a point where we've solved this problem a little bit for the users of the site, so maybe an admin or content creator, but there's a lot more that we have to solve to make this work across this entire portfolio of sites. So we've got working for one site, but we have 100 sites, right? What do we do to get this list to apply to 100 sites? So I had to take the list and put it somewhere in the cloud where all of the sites can access it. And actually, that's a really good way to make this scale. So now I've got the plugin, I can take it, load this text file into the plugin, and then I'll be able to use it for more than one installation of this plugin across different sites. Now that's really good. There are still some problems there, because what would happen if we needed to allow a new plugin? So I can change that. I can change the plugin on the list, and the way that it was built is the plugin list doesn't get pulled in every time you load the admin dashboard, because I think that'd be a little bit heavy-handed. So I set it as a transient, so essentially the allow list gets stored for 24 hours. And I think that's a good number. I'm not set on 24 hours being the right number. Maybe that is it needs to be updated less or more frequently. But as a start, the idea that we'll keep the information and hold it and then check back at a later time. So I think that's a really good way of being able to allow for changes to happen to that list. Now, there is a problem though, because if we do change the list now, so we're storing it for 24 hours, we have to wait another 24 hours or up to 24 hours for that change to take effect. So we have to build a way to refresh the list, which I did. A simple, a little admin panel that allows us to hit a button and then basically delete the list that's being stored, and then call in the list, and do that as, whenever an admin needs to change the plugins. This can be done by the users of the site as well. So this doesn't have to be done by the IT team or the people that actually govern the list, which is actually a small team. So developers don't have access to that list. It's purely coming from this central web team that manages all sites. Okay, so now we have the allow list. You have a way to refresh it, but there is another problem. So the problem here is, so we've done a good job of making it so our editors and our admins can actually do what they're supposed to do and not install anything that they're not. But developers, they could just do different things. So they could change the name of the plugin. They could just disable the must-use plugin. They could do all sorts of different things, even going in and keeping the plugin and just changing what the functions actually do of the plugin. You could do all sorts of malicious things here. I think we have to have a certain level of trust that the developers that we hire are not going to do that. However, there's another layer that we can add here by using webhooks. So what I wanted to do is on the deployment, so when a site gets deployed, so the code goes from whatever environment it's on, let's say it's on a test site and it moves to production, a webhook can be triggered that will run another set of code, so any other scripts that you wanted to run, essentially. And it is really flexible. You could run WP CLI, you could run just a custom PHP script, and that's what I've done here, is really taken the same logic that I use for the allow list. I'm doing it a second time at the deployment stage. And that gives you the ability to say that even if somebody has changed something, they still can't install plugins that they're not supposed to. So that gets us to a really good point now, and I think that it's not going to be 100% foolproof. There's always going to be somebody that tries to circumvent a security requirement, but I think that we're in a better spot where we can say this actually meets the university's requirements, and it does what they need it to do. So actually, I should be skipping these things, so we're moving around the circle, guys. I just got stuck in one place, so we'll have to do some more clicking here. So I'll get a good workout for my thumb. So all right, so that Quicksilver hook, and this is something that's really this will pop up again in a couple of different spots. But the key is this. So Quicksilver is Pantheon's automation. There are different terms for what this is called in other platforms. But I think this is the concept is that once an action happens, a script is fired, or you could do something on that action. So we have sort of this working list now, and we're in a good spot. Our developers can't do anything malicious, our users can't do anything malicious, but we have a problem because these sites already exist. They're not new sites that we could build and we could start to install the plugins that we want. We actually don't even know what the list is at this point because there's 100 sites and we'd have to get all of the plugins from all of those sites to compile this list together. So that's a big challenge, and you know, you could go into WordPress and then just install. You could just go to the dashboard and list out the plugins, just copy them out. That's going to be painful, right? That would be painful to do for one site. In order to make life easier, this is where WP CLI comes in. So you could run WP CLI, a command line script that will go and then do a WordPress function. So it'd be the same thing as if I went into WordPress and I looked at the page that shows you all the plugins. This will do that, but in one line of code. So you can type a command, WP plugin list, and that gives us the output of the plugin. Now it does that on your screen, and it's in a developer's terminal. This is not necessarily the most useful way to get the output of that and do something with it, but you can change the format. So you can make that into a CSV file. So I can now export a list of the plugins that are in a site and get that in a CSV file. I can take that into Google Docs or whatever you use for spreadsheets, and I can start to look and maybe compile a larger list. Now that's good, and we've solved the problem for a single site, but we have 100 sites. So we need a way to run that plugin list command across 100 sites. And this is where platform automation comes in. So there is a way to get all of the sites, a list of all of the sites and in the account through platform automation. So and on Pantheon, this is a command line tool called Terminus. And what Terminus does is allows you to do anything that you could do by pressing a button. You can do this on the command line. So, and it ranges from getting information about sites or about the account to creating an environment or even deploying code. So this is really, really powerful. So now you can actually use the platform in a way where you can get information about the account, and then you could use that to run something across a site. So the idea here is that I can get my account, I can get my list of sites, and then for each site I can do that plugin list. So I can get that list, I can store all of this, all the lists of plugins in a single CSV file, and now I've got a good data set to work with, and I can actually start to build this allow list from this little bit of automation that I've done. And of course, 100 sites running in an automated script, that saved a ton of time. That is something that's going to make life a lot easier for somebody who might have to run that command 100 times. So that's a key part of this solution, and you'll see this come up as a recurring theme. So we've got now a list that we can actually use. We've solved the problem for the use cases that we need, and we've got a little bit of automation thrown in there to make life easier. So we forgot about something. Maybe I forgot about it. You guys didn't forget about it. So it's essentially you have existing sites that don't have this plugin installed, right? So we need to then install this plugin across 100 sites. Great. So that's kind of the same as what we just did by getting the list. We can just go through the account, we can get all the sites, and then we can install this plugin. But it's not that easy. Has anyone ever tried to install a must-use plugin via the command line? For any devs out there, can you do that? Can't do it. Can't do must-use. You can install a plugin, but there's no way to do a must-use plugin. So a little bit of extra work there to make it so you guys probably are smarter than me and have better ways to think about it. I've just installed it and then moved it. So essentially I get the credentials for SFTP, so I can go in and do a file transfer and actually very simply move the file. So, and it's not the most technical way of doing things, but we're putting it in one place, moving it to the must-use directory, and now we've got this. We're actually starting to get a more cohesive system. I think this is really a big part of this solution is now built, and we've made it a bit more easy to do. And actually, it's, you know, when I say we made it easier to do, I have to do this work. So it's not a team that's doing this work. It's a single person. So if you didn't automate it, I think you'd just go crazy. So the next part of the solution, I haven't really mentioned what this is, but one of their requirements was also so that the university wanted to be able to understand when their code changes, so when a deployment was made. They use a tool called New Relic in order to understand their application performance. So that's a monitor. It is a way to visualize a lot of the data about the usage of the system. So if you're thinking in servers, it's a way to see how PHP and MySQL are running. And if there are any points in time where usage is high, it allows you to kind of see what's going on, get a gauge for how your site is running. New Relic is a great tool for troubleshooting, and oftentimes you look at it and say it is one of these things where you can spot problems easily. So let's say, for example, you had an influx in traffic, you would see that the usage of your system would increase. So the New Relic system also allows you to call it via webhooks. So there is a way that I can say to call a URL, and it will insert a marker based on the timestamp of that operation. So when the code is deployed, I can call the New Relic API. Now I do that again by using this Quicksilver hook or the webhooks, and so that gives me another part of this problem that's solved. But again, I have to install that same Quicksilver hook across the rest of the 100 sites. So another job for using that same, get the account, get all the sites, and then go through and perform an operation. Okay. So, and I guess this was just to kind of visualize what you would use deployment markers for in New Relic. One of the other things here, and I haven't really touched on this at all, we've sort of been talking about maybe a test site and a production site, but New Relic and the entire solution. So on Pantheon, you can have more than one environment, and you can actually freely install these. So you can create a developer environment, and you'd still be able to look at New Relic for each individual environment. So that's very important. So in this case, we don't have to go through just the site and install it. We could actually go through each one of those environments, and that could be scripted as well. So there are a couple of reasons why we needed to focus on notifications. And I think this really, to me, I think this is a very important part of the process, because what it does is you're taking WordPress and doing something, but you have to get another system to understand what WordPress is doing. And we're not talking about anything high tech here. In this case, the university wanted to get a message. They wanted to get an email when a deployment was made or when a change was made. And very simply, we can use those Quicksilver webhooks in order to then go and call an API. Now, I originally wanted to do this using like a message platform like Slack, but the university said they have too much noise. So if it goes to a Slack channel, they probably won't see it. They actually wanted to get an email. And I think that makes sense. Although I was really more excited to build this in Slack than I was as email. Fine. So I used SendGrid API to actually call the email. So just create a simple message, say this site has been deployed, or this site or environment has been created. And there's a couple of reasons why that's important. So they want to know what happens with code. So if there's a deployment, they should have some visibility of what's going on. But probably what's more important is if somebody creates a new environment or a new site, they need to tie back to the university's restrictions. So that has to be enabled. So that if you remember those IP restrictions that I was talking about, that has to be done for each time a site is created or an environment, a dev environment is created. And so that's actually a really unique problem that is really, it's not something that we've done for other customers before. So in this case, I wanted to think of a way to essentially automate a manual process. So the way that our team would do this is by taking they would create a ticket and then they would go and implement it in their system. So it would be essentially adding the IP restrictions, but they would have to be notified about that essentially. And the kind of manual way to do this is, well, university creates a site, and then they go and they contact our support team. That's not good. It's a very error-prone process. You may have somebody who forgets about doing that, or I just don't see that as a great process. So I thought about ways that we can automate the actual process and adding in those IP restrictions in our system. Maybe that could be done by API, and I think that would be the way to completely automate this. And that would be fantastic. However, in this case, the decision was made to use just a ticketing system. So when a new site is created, essentially a ticket will be created in Zendesk, and that will go to our support team. And so they get this automated ticket that tells them they got some work to do. So better, not fully perfect, and I think in the perfect world, I would love to have this entire thing automated so that there is no support ticket, it just gets done, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, so I guess the last part of this is really the pipeline, and I think we've gone through a bunch of ways. So we've got our plugin across many sites, and we've got messaging, and we've got other actions that happen when the site is deployed. You could even go further. So you could use a CI/CD pipeline in order to make other changes on deploy. So essentially, if you were working with something like GitHub, you would push changes to GitHub, and GitHub could then go and do anything. And this is an amazing thing. GitHub can run a script or an action, and it can call another API, it can call another system, it can install dependencies. So very much like some of these things that we've done in WordPress itself and with the webhooks, you could also do that at the CI/CD level. And I think that's a really amazing thing, and that's just a different layer of automation. This could be a completely other talk, a complete other talk about how to automate your deployment using a CI/CD pipeline. And there are just so many things that you could do as far as testing and building assets and installing dependencies. However, I think for this solution, I think CI/CD is just maybe the next step. If we can get them to the point where all of this is working and it's good, I think we might think about CI/CD. So, but really, I think that is the main kind of the main summary of the project, and really the kind of the work that I've done to try to solve these big problems that are based around just scaling out a solution across many different sites. The three things that I want you all to take away, and I guess the three things that I've really learned throughout this process, is to use the platform to automate as much as I possibly can. And I think that's a really powerful thing. You have to have a platform that allows for that. Some do and some don't. However, there are always ways to do things. You can always script things and figure out a way to do some level of this automation, even if it's with other systems and using something that's external to the platform where you're running your WordPress sites. The second part, it actually builds off of that platform automation, is using that automation to run WP CLI, and actually having a system where it will do something repeatable for many sites and scale out the solution so that you have it across a large portfolio, instead of having to manually do this and waste a lot of time, energy, and make your developers really frustrated. And then the third part, where I think this is where automation truly comes to life, is when you start to bring in these third-party systems like messaging, notifications, tickets. Potentially you do other systems that are relevant to business and whatever the site actually does, but it's completely open. So as long as you have a way to actually create an action and fire a webhook, you can do anything. So that is what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I hope this has been useful. It's just a little perspective of a day in the life of essentially my new role. It's been really an exciting journey, and I hope to do more of that. If you are interested in seeing some of the code, I have that here at GitHub. You can take a look and tell me what I need to change to make it work better. Thank you, guys.
First question.
Questions?
Thank you for the interesting talk.
Yeah, I think.
Just a small question. Are the sites they are running just WordPress native installs, or is it composer driven?
It's not composer driven, and so I desperately wanted to have them in Composer, but because they need that flexibility of installing plugins themselves, it could work. It could work. And what we could do is install a set of plugins, and then they could add things on. I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I'd like to have them all in Composer, right? So it's that the problem is they need to have this defined list. However, they also have the flexibility that they would want to install things. And it probably doesn't make sense to install all of the plugins on all sites, which they could do, right? You could have all of them, but you might have a lot of plugins that you're not using on sites. Some of them are relatively simple. They are complex sites, but some of them are really just like small brochures.
Yeah, I just mentioned because you said we use the must-use plugins.
Yeah.
And Bedrock has a nice implementation of using most plugins.
I'm a big fan of Bedrock, yeah.
Yeah.
And I desperately wanted to use it for this project. I think there's just a couple of reasons why it wouldn't work, but yes, a great approach, and actually even another good idea to talk about as well.
Thanks for the presentation, Edmund.
Yes.
I have two quick questions around the allow list as well. One is, did you have the situation that they had plugins installed in one site and then someone decided to basically remove the allowance for a plugin? Is that automated as well?
In terms of them,
Like
do you
disallowing...
mean, has that happened before? Or?
Yeah. Is that implemented, like somehow informing people this will have to be deleted or was deleted or something like that?
No, but I think it's a good idea. So you're essentially saying to message the web team when somebody tries to install something that they shouldn't? Yeah.
No, like I think you had like multiple sites, they had plugins installed. So you fetched all the plugins and that made the allow list, right?
Yeah.
And then someone could in future decide to remove one plugin from the allow list, but it's still active somewhere. So inform people they have to manually delete that or it will be deleted or so.
Yeah.
That's something I just thought about.
That's great. Have not thought about that, so that is...
Yeah, well, maybe it wasn't an issue yet. So,
man, I've got some homework now.
Maybe I shouldn't ask the second question then. The allow list is for security purposes, right? They want to, shouldn't that maybe include versions of the plugin and not just the slug? So yes, you can install this plugin, but if you have like a security team or so, they would read through the code of one specific version and say this version is fine. If next week there's a new one, I don't know what will change. Is that not a concern of the university yet?
I don't think so. I don't think they're involved at that level for governance. So, and it's funny because they are really strict, but some things are, it just doesn't seem to be that deep in some places. So, but yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Edmund. I remembered, and I looked it up on my phone, but we actually were in a call together on a different project, which involved multi-site. And my question is, because it seems like the university was in a position where they were feeling this pain of decentralization across these 100 sites, where they have many different vendors, because departments may have had different sort of business relations with individual vendors, which put them in a decision where they couldn't say, let's attack this problem at the root, which would be to consolidate all of this into a multi-site, which would solve some of the problems that they had. Like, was that ever considered or sort of, suggested to them as like a drastic maneuver that would save like a lot of these kinds of things that you now have to do to remediate like these problems that occur when you have 100 individual sites as opposed to a big multi-site, which would give them plenty of advantages?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I didn't suggest that to them, and it comes down to the size of some of these sites were quite large, and they haven't been maintained very well. So some of the databases are extremely large. We could do that, and I think in the right situation that would work really well. But so out of those 20 multi-sites that they have, so imagine there's 100 sites, 20 of them multi-sites, but in the multi-sites, so they have 300 domains mapping to sites. So there's quite a lot of child sites in those multi-sites. So that problem already exists where we have these large multi-sites that is kind of hard to maintain. So I do think that's a really good approach if you could start from scratch and do this as if we could think it out. I would like that as a solution, and I think that could work really well.
No, but so at that scale, I can totally understand that was an option. Thanks so much.
I've seen plenty of multi-sites that are that large though, and it does, as long as I think the key is they have to be related and use the same plugins and use the same themes, and not just be sites that are very different, that are all just trying to be in one code base. So, but yeah, thank you.
You will be available for more questions?
Yeah, I'll be at the Pantheon booth if anyone wants to have a chat, and I'd love to talk to you guys. Thank you so much.
Nice. Thank you.
Amazing.
From us.